of the meeting.
Okay,
You're live.
so,
All right, it says that you're now good to go.
okay. So State Representative, we are live with State Representative LaShawn Ford. And Representative Ford, greetings. I'm going to give you a sec to catch up with your social media if you'd like.
Yep, we could move right ahead. Thank you, Mark.
Excellent. Well, it's nice to have an opportunity to talk to you. Obviously, a lot happened over the last, let's say, 48 hours with regard to Illinois dispensary licenses. And, I think a lot of people have questions, and you're a perfect guy to talk to about some answers and some thoughts. But first, I actually just wanted to ask you to say a few things about yourself for folks who may not know. Maybe tell us a little bit about your district, and maybe how long you've been in the legislature, what committees you're leading, and maybe what some of your priorities are.
That's good, Mark. So LaShawn Ford, state rep, I live on the west side of Chicago. That's where I was raised. Went to, of course, schools on the west side, and teacher by profession and a real estate broker also. And I've been representing the 8th district now since 2007, which entails the Austin, parts of the Austin community, Oak Park, parts of Oak Park, parts of Berwyn, parts of LaGrange Park, all of North Riverside, and a small piece of Forest Park. And I also chair the Higher Ed Appropriations Committee, and I'm on a few other committees, but that Higher Ed Approps Committee that I chair is pretty important to me. And also I'm on the budget team for the Illinois House of Representatives. And of course, I've been picked to be the chair of a task force for firearms to do everything that we can to cut the flow of illegal firearms into the state of Illinois. But I've also worked with you, Mark, for a number of years, and I really appreciate your knowledge of the process in Springfield. It's not, the legislators are not the only ones that make laws. It's a process, and I think that people will hear what that means soon.
Well, thank you. You're very kind, and I appreciate it. So, we're going to talk about cannabis, but first, let me say that I'm a proud constituent of yours, and I need a yard sign over here in the Oak Park part of your district.
Yes.
So let me know when I can stop by and grab one. But I guess, before we even get to the cannabis part, I mean, there's just so much going on in the world. So, I know you personally, and, I care about you. And so I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing with, these words are so fraught now when we talk about, well, with everything going on, how are you? But really, what's going on with you? How are you? What are you working on? What do you think?
Mark, I think I really appreciate that coming from a white man asking a brother, how you doing? You understand how challenging it is in the world that we're living in right now, and how there is this racial almost divide. And Black people are right now, I think, at the center of attention. And, and it's all because of social and economic injustices and inequalities. And I think that there's this movement right now in America to change it. And there's resistance to it. And right now, it is very difficult for blacks and whites in this country because everyone's uncomfortable at this time. Everyone is uncomfortable because things are not going as usual. Of course, black people have been uncomfortable for a very long time, and I welcome my peers to be in that same setting of feeling a little uncomfortable because when you do that, that's how you get things changed. And I think that's where we're at in America when we have one another from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different colors, willing to talk to one another and find out what we're thinking. That's critical.
Well, thank you for that. And really, as far as I'm concerned, um, I don't know. I've found that being uncomfortable is an important part of being an ally. I think a lot of us have been too comfortable for too long, and feeling that feeling of unsettledness, feeling that feeling of, well, it can only go up from here because it can't get any worse. And then you wake up in the morning and you check the headlines and it's gotten worse. And one of the interesting things is that I've had a lot of friends of color who've been sort of saying and posting on social media, I'm tired. And my reaction is like, well, holy crap, I'm tired and I'm just the audience,
Yeah.
perhaps in the active audience, but I can only imagine how you feel. So,
Yeah,
uh,
let me just tell you because I know it's going to lead to something. I think that, you know, everything that we do in America and Illinois should be about equity and it should be about justice and it should be about people having a fair shot to participate in all that this country has to offer. That's got to be our North Star. It has to be everything that we aim for. Because when we don't aim for equity and when we don't aim for justice, then there's going to be consequences for avoiding equity, avoiding justice, and suppressing and oppressing people. So I think that our goal moving forward is to have this North Star mentality of making sure that everything that we do is about fairness and justice and making sure that people have equal opportunities to success.
well, as a Russian Jew who came to this country as a refugee as a 10-year-old, and got beat up in Moscow, as an 8-year-old for being a Jew. Just know that uh, you know we're with you. Um, but that said, the touchy feely stuff aside,
Oh,
uh,
last thing, Mark, I have to say what's amazing about that is, it always, and I know as a black man that, there is injustices in America for everyone. Some just experience it in other ways and more impactful. But when you start talking about injustices that white people feel, it becomes part of economics. And that's where people with more money have the ability to dominate and lock out even white people and lock out, different minority groups, lock out white women. And that leads to where we see other people not having a shot at a real opportunity because it boils down to not just color, but economics, where people that have more could dominate and rule over the system, and we can't have that.
well, a lot of everything, a lot of black and white is about the green at the end of the day, and just even in terms of, to get us back on track on cannabis, Cannabis, a lot of it is black and white, but it's really about the green. And I guess maybe pun intended in this case, green in a lot of ways. But um, uh, so you were part of the debate, part of the discussion when the cannabis legislation got passed in Springfield and got signed into law. You've been part of the conversation. Subsequently, I don't, obviously, since this is a video event, I don't need to point out to anyone that you're a member of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus. Um, um, so the licenses, the first sort of iteration of the announcement on the licenses came out. And I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of, I think there's a lot of room to talk about as a legal issue, and as a regulatory issue, and as a political issue, but just as an issue of social justice, legislative intent, big picture. What are your thoughts on the initial rollout of, well, you know what? And actually, let me maybe preface that by giving everybody a full picture. So we had 700 total applicants for 75 adult use cannabis dispensary licenses. So we had 700 total applicants who altogether submitted 4,000 separate applications. So we know lots of applicants submitted multiple applications, essentially buying more darts to throw at the dartboard in terms of the application process, hoping that they were going to hit a bullseye. So the announcements came out. There are scores that are tied everywhere, and there will be a lottery. But as it stands now, with 700 applicants, 600 of whom were social equity applicants, with 4,000 applications, we now have 20 or so, 21 companies, some of them seemingly to be controlled by same holding companies that are in so 21 tops getting all 75 licenses. Legality aside, by the way, I want to congratulate the winners. I think as far as certainly the state is concerned, they won fair and square. And I don't want to question anybody's motives or anybody's arrangements or composition of their business. That said, what's your legislative intent kind of feeling, the conversation about social equity with this outcome?
Yeah. So I want to tell you, one, my phone is ringing. I would think that, Mark, one, we go back to the making of this legislation and the process by which was led by Governor J.B. Pritzker. This is something that Governor J.B. Pritzker would take and say that this is one of his big wins in the state of Illinois. And so he put his team together to help write this legislation. So we have to make sure that we give him credit for writing this legislation, pushing it to pass in the General Assembly, because this is something that has been a wish for many people for a long time, but Governor J.B. Pritzker was able to get it done. And so he's owed all of the credit for making sure that he put all his efforts behind and even putting his team and administration on board to help write this legislation. The process for me throughout the making of this bill was something that I didn't like as much because I feel like the chief sponsors really were not open to real negotiations about equity and justice and making sure safeguards were in place. And I expressed my concerns about that throughout the making and of the bill to the governor's staff, to the governor, to the sponsors of the bill. You know, and so they continued to push through, even all the way to the day of debate. The debate was cut short, and we were not allowed to give our questions to the sponsors because it was a limited debate and it wasn't open for discussion as to whether or not we can ask more questions. So that was a problem, and so from the beginning we saw problems. So right now I know that what I've heard from constituents is that there are concerns that whether the law or the implementation of the law is flawed. We have to get to the bottom of it, because one, we have to make sure that whomever will be licensed in Illinois, that it will be known to be fair and just. And so that's what people are looking for right now. They're looking to make sure that whoever ultimately becomes the winner, that they win fairly. And that's what people are concerned that, you know, they invest their hard-earned money into a system that they believed in. And we have to ask ourselves if that is true, if the system was fair and just, especially when we look at the organization KPMG. You know, they were hired by the state to do the scoring. They were hired with a no bid contract, and that's questionable, because we know that KPMG has been an organization that's had some, you know, some ethical questions raised in the past. And so I think that the people that have invested so much money and time, see, people might think that it's just the application fee, but people have invested hundreds of thousands, I believe, that some people have, just to write the application. And they deserve better. And you know what? We're going to do something about that to make sure that that they get a fair shot at this, that the administration comes forth and tells the truth and hit the brakes on this process and regroup, because we know, one, we can make sure that people that are in the process now, we can make sure that things could be fixed for this first 75. But what we could do most is make sure that all the license that will be coming forth, that we have a better process, a fair process moving forward. And that's what we have to have in Illinois if we want to be leading in this cannabis arena.
Well, and there are a lot of specific remedies we can certainly discuss, particularly in trying to at least make applicants who, you know, at least got reasonably good scores and should stand a chance. I would hope we can, you know, talk about things like waiving their application fees in the next round of applications. I think that would be, you know, one small step, but a very tangible step. But let me go back to just process. So you passed the legislation. The legislation was signed into law. All of us, you know, have been watching with bated breath what happens from there. Those of us who are advocates, lobbyists, sort of, you know, certainly were kept at arm's length for the most part. And I didn't have very much insight into the internal workings of the process. One would hope, as a legislator, that pass the legislation, there you would know more about it. So what was sort of excuse me, communication between the guys who passed the law and the implementers of the law? How widely were you consulted? You know, what did you know about what was going on? You know, By the way, did you guys get a heads up before this announcement was made about, the selected organizations or anything like that? I mean, a lot of us are just curious about, hey, we're on the outside. Uh, we knew not to expect much. What did you guys get?
Yeah, one, let's go straight to that. We learned of the announcement when the public learned, and that's one thing that was kept away from legislators, I believe. I don't know of anyone that had access to the firm that did the contract scoring, KPMG. I don't know anyone that had influence there. And so we learned exactly um, when the public learned. That's what I know about the announcement. I don't know any legislator, especially anyone from the Black Caucus, that knew about who was going to win. Um, the question is, there's always, and there will always be, bills that pass into law with unintended consequences, and we have to go back and fix it. We see that happening every day, regardless of what the bill is, what the law is, there's always going to be fixes. And so we knew that there would be some changes necessary once we learned how the rollout took place. But what we didn't know and what we expected from the administration was to make sure that this process was fair, that people had the opportunity to have a real shot at winning the license. And so we know that the director or the secretary of the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation, when she knew that there were only 21 companies that had made the lottery, the question is, why didn't she stop the process then? See, the law allowed that. The law allowed for the administration to have stopped the process when they saw only 21 companies had made the lottery. The secretary, the director, could have easily started the process over and fixed it at that time before the announcement. And so the question is, why didn't that happen? So, we could say that it's poorly written legislation, but it also leads to the point where the administration had the ability to and the power through the legislation to make sure that things worked out a little more fair, and it didn't. So we know that the administration failed on this, and they must admit that there are flaws in the rollout, flaws in the current law, and their executive rulemaking. And that's what we have to get to, because there's a lot at stake here where we have learned quickly that we need to fix this. Because the question is, will the governor be willing to go to war and spend taxpayer dollars to defend a small number of applications versus just fixing the language and making sure that the licensees are fair and just when they are announced?
So, in terms of, I think, outcomes, I think we can, one way to group them would be into sort of two separate buckets. There's what we can do about this current batch of the 75 licenses, whether they're, you know, whether it's reasonable to expect that the administration will say, well, heck, we're either going to get sued by 21 companies that have gotten so far, or we're going to get sued by the 680 companies that were essentially got the short end of the stick. So we'll go with protecting the 680. But it's like, I'm not a lawyer, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night, so hey, I can speculate and be an armchair quarterback with the best of them. Again, you being a legislator, I would assume you've had sort of more detailed internal dialogue with other members of the legislature and with your allies in the legislature. And, you know, just in terms of sheer speculation, and we understand this may be very ambitious and very aspirational because, you know, at least at this point, the law is the law. But what are your thoughts about, you know, before we start thinking about what we're going to do about the next batch, which under current law, the next batch is 110 dispensary licenses that have to be announced or given out by the end of next year. What can we do? You know, let's talk about future legislation and future plans in a little while. But let's first at least speculate and hypothesize about what can be done about the 75 licenses. And you know, this is very much a conversation, so I don't. It's not news, so I'm not. You know, I'm not afraid to share my editorial opinion, which is that there, you know, as I read the law, as I read the rules, as I read the application, there's plenty of places where it says, look, this is a pretty arbitrary process. The state essentially, you know, owns the licenses. Even when we hand them out, we're sort of leasing them or lending them to you. We can take them back. And you know, from the way I read it, there was something in the law that says the department can deny license applications for reasons X, Y, and Z, and any other reason that they deem somebody might be not a good licensee, right? And this reminds me of sort of gaming legislation where a casino owner can lose their license for, you know, associations with criminals, let's say, and things like that. So sorry for the editorial opinion, and you know, I should let the elected official talk more than the moderator. But what are your thoughts about you know, the current 75 and whether how much can be done?
Well, first we have to make sure that we get a full understanding about the agency KPMG and whether or not their process was ethical and fair. Because if it all comes to be true that the license winners won fairly, then they should have won. And I think that we have to respect that. And I think that you congratulated them early, saying that congratulations to the winners of the license. So I want to make sure that I too want to join you in congratulating them. And if they won fairly and squarely. But if they didn't, that's where we have to find out if there's any unethical acts in this. And that's why KPMG must speak up. So, I mean, what I want to do now, starting on Tuesday, I will be sending letters and asking for a Zoom meeting or in-person meeting with key individuals in the administration, including the director of IDFPR, Deborah Hagan. I will be looking to meet with the senior advisor, Toy Hutchison, and the new cannabis czar, and of course, Christian Mitchell, the deputy governor, who was very instrumental in writing this legislation. You know, I believe the administration should have an opportunity to explain what happened and what it's going to be doing to fix this situation. So we want to make sure that we get to that right away. We have to be prepared to fix this because we have a fall veto session. So we need to look at immediate revisiting the legislation during this time for the fall veto session in November, which is November 17th. So while doing all of that, we will be fixing the problem and making sure that the final winners of the cannabis licenses, we could be sure that they won fairly and squarely. And I think that even if a license is announced and a person won and they know that they won with some hanky panky, they probably wouldn't be as angry because there's nowhere to turn, nowhere to fight it. Because the truth would be that they won in a way that they should not have won. So we don't have to worry about knocking out someone that didn't win because they were highly qualified, because what are they going to say in court? We just want to make sure that people that should have won win. And so that's the goal, to make sure that we put a break on this lottery. There is a good reason. We have good reasons to put a break on the lottery of announcing the actual winners. So that has to happen first and foremost. The governor should do that. He owes it to the people of Illinois. He owes it to the, I think you said 700 applicants that have submitted and paid, I think, what is it, $2,500 a piece for the application?
At least for social equity applicants, and double that for other applicants.
Yeah, so the state is not in a Ponzi scheme. The state is in the business of making sure that we are fair and just. So what do we look like taking people's dollars? That's why I think it's pretty fair to say that if we know there were improprieties in this first round, that people have a right to resubmit their applications at no cost.
So,
yeah.
Sorry to cut you off.
Yeah.
Please keep going.
I'll lay out some questions that I will have for the governor after we talk.
Please.
Yeah. So, I mean, whenever you ask your question, I'll come back to those.
Well, again, and this is, I think you probably might be going where I'm going, because one of the things I was going to ask is, you know, and a lot of times I don't even attribute things, you know, to nefarious intent necessarily, as much as lack of experience, bureaucratic bungling, poor communication, lack of planning between the vendor and the state. Wouldn't be the first time. You know, we've been handing out minority contracts for decades, and we still can't get that right. So there's no, you know, there's no sort of criminal, as it were, nefarious intent necessary. As I like to, you know, I'm a lobbyist, so I like to remind myself that it's not personal. You know, so what I say in my own head is a sort of a take on an Abraham Lincoln phrase, which is, don't attribute to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. And that's sort of been helpful to me. So as I think about the process, do we know sort of what the state told KPMG to do? Do we know what the communication was? I mean, I would assume KPMG at some point had to be told by someone, here are our goals in doing this, and here's the rubric that you should use in terms of achieving these goals. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I think maybe letting all lawyers run this process is part of what got us to this point. So what do you know about what KPMG was, you know, what the charge to them was? And I think maybe that goes towards the questions you were asking.
Yeah, I think that the agency KPMG was hired to make sure that there was arm links in the state of Illinois from legislators and people that were a part of the medical cannabis process of selecting the winners. So in the previous win of the medical cannabis, the state felt that the process wasn't as fair as it should have been, because they said that there were no minority winners, and there were just some things that they felt wasn't right. And so I think that the governor's full intent was to try to have a fair process. And if that was his intent, then I give him the opportunity now to admit that his intentions were not fulfilled, and that the process fell short of his intentions when hiring KPMG to do the scoring. But so I would think that the governor and his administration had the greatest intention to get the highest and best companies to win these licenses. So if that's the case, then we will hear from the administration saying that that was their intent and that it didn't work out the way it was, and that they take ownership to that and they plan to make it better. And so there was some things that I would question the administration on, and that is, why was KPMG hired on a no bid contract to do the scoring? They were hired on a no bid contract to do the scoring for the cannabis licenses in Illinois. That's not good.
Hey, just by the way, in the spirit of what we've been talking about, I wanted to jump in and say, I wonder if there were any minority consulting firms, minority-owned consulting firms, by the way, that could have been considered to have done the scoring. I wonder whether that question was asked.
You know, that's a really good question. I mean, talk about fairness and opportunities for everyone. This KPMG, I mean, that's a good question, Mark. And the other question, you know, I want to know, what were there African-American participation in the KPMG contract? And why was the firm specifically capable in this area? You know, why was KPMG specifically capable in doing cannabis scoring? What experience do they have in doing this? You know, the unemployment rate in Illinois is pretty high during this pandemic. And, you know, we could have easily hired temporary workers and have done this ourselves as a state, but we chose to hire an outside agency and paid millions of dollars. I'm sure it was millions. I'm not exactly sure what the amount was for the contract, but it was a no bid contract.
I believe the number that I've heard, 7 million.
Yeah, so 7 million for that. So the other questions that I would ask is, when I look at who is in the cannabis lottery, you talked about this, only 21 companies was in the lottery because it hired people who came from disproportionately impacted areas. Now, only 21 companies was in the lottery because they hired people who came from disproportionately impacted areas. And you know what that means, Mark. So you could tell them what that means. What is a disproportionately impacted area?
Well, a poor area that has been designated by the state as having been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs and over-policed, and an area where people could really use a boost from jobs. And, you know, at least to be factual, that's one of the 3 ways that somebody can qualify as a social equity applicant. So, you know, the bottom line is, the way to qualify social equity as a social equity applicant was, you know, either as having been through residence or contact with the criminal justice system, been impacted yourself by the war on drugs, or through hiring people who have suffered from such impact.
And speaking of that, I mean, I know that's, I don't know how it feels when Black people talk about hiring Black people more and more and more and more, but there is a disproportionate number of Black people that have been impacted by this cannabis law. The law, I should say, the war on drugs, or people, Black people have more cases than anyone else. So I thought that the goal of the program was to create jobs for African Americans, you know? So was creating jobs scoring lower than having lived in a disproportionate impact area? We don't know. Those are some questions that we have to ask. I mean, you got an answer, Mark?
Hey, who's interviewing whom? But so in terms of questions to be asked, one thing and again, I have my own opinion on the answer, but in terms of anything actually stopping the governor from releasing every single piece of paper about this whole process, from the detailed scoring of every of the 4,000 applications, the detailed structure that was provided in the application of ownership, the detail of the communication and the business done between the state and KPMG. I mean, you know, I'd be curious who KPMG's day-to-day contact was at the state of Illinois. But you know, I don't think the governor has to release any or of this, at least if really not until the FOIAs and the lawsuits force them to do so. But I'd be real curious about all these things. Is there anything that is stopping the governor from releasing all or almost all the information, almost in a forensic way today?
Well, Mark, you know, I put a number, I had 4, I'm gonna put number 5 now. And so what you're saying is that you want to see an audit. You want to see an audit of KPMG. I mean, the process of scoring. I think that that's going to be one of the questions. I mean, who audited the scoring process over KPMG? In other words, who was checking their results to make sure errors were not made? We need to get those answers from the administration. So I have noted that one, Mark.
Excuse me. So let's talk. And by the way, Representative Ford, you know, this is your time also. Hopefully your constituents are tuning in. And I know, you know, we think hundreds, if not thousands of people will watch this over the coming days also. So I think, you know, to focus a little bit on next steps. I think we've talked about releasing information and releasing all the scores and releasing detail on all the scoring of the scores and that kind of stuff. We've talked about hitting the brakes on the process. Again, this license is really, at this point, all is that you know, all that has been announced so far is a chance of being considered to get a license. But to go next to sort of future steps, legislation, and I want to start by actually, you know, I don't want to be too ass kissy here, but I think it's pretty big of you to say, hey, as a legislator, you know, what could I done better? How could I have had my voice heard more during the process? And how do we fix this now? And I really commend you for that, because you know, most people are going to start with, well, who else did something wrong? So I think that's really, really refreshing to see. In terms of, you know, conversation among the Black Caucus, you know, is there going to be some kind of a action on this? As, you know, we've heard perhaps at least unofficially described Black Caucus agenda going into veto session and the subsequent session. Is cannabis going to be on that menu?
Absolutely. And we hope that the people, before I get to that, we hope that the people are outraged. Whether you have a cannabis application or not, you should want this law that's going to put cannabis in your communities, in the state of Illinois, to be as ethical as possible. And so, yes, we as caucus hope that the communities will work and show their discontent, to show their anger, and to push the governor to acknowledge the flaws in this government, in this law, so that we can have a good plan moving forward for the fall veto session. So, you know, working with you and this organization, that the medical cannabis groups, I think that we will be presenting a plan to amend the law And we must get the acknowledgement and commitment from the governor to work with us to make sure that we do this.
And
And we don't want the governor to continue to, or to even try to spin this as if everything is okay. If we allow that, then we will have a flawed system as relates to the cannabis laws in Illinois.
And by the way, at this point, I've already played lawyer with my speculation, so now I'll play a real broadcaster. You mentioned a whole group of people that you will be seeking to meet with and talk to in the administration who had worked on this cannabis application process. And so it occurs to me, by the way, that any of those people mentioned or anyone else from the administration or the departments that wants to talk about this would be welcome on the medical cannabis community. We're a community of 30,000 active and activist medical cannabis and cannabis consumers. There is off the charts thousands of people kinds of engagement in the medical cannabis community, Facebook groups, online, and I think boy, my phone lit up after the announcement came out, and a lot of it was confusion and some outrage and some questions. What can we do at this? And again, I'm a lobbyist, so I generally, don't advocate on my own behalf. This is I have clients, but one of the things that always I love about the medical cannabis community is that people are constantly reaching out, posting, going, hey, what can we do? So in addition to perhaps sharing this conversation on their social media and maybe sharing the post I made about the time for the governor to step up, fess up, and clean up this application mess, well, I mean, really, is this the kind of thing that people should be calling legislators about, should be contacting the governor's office about, or is this really too much insider baseball to ask our army to get involved?
I think that there are several layers. One, as a taxpayer, as a person in this state that votes, you could just demand fairness and equity and make sure that this process is right. That's enough right there that you show and you call the sponsor of the bill in the House and the sponsor of the bill in the Senate and ask them to get it right. You call the governor's office and his administration and ask them to get it right. You don't have to go into details about how to get it right. They understand that there's something wrong and they need to know that you know that there's something wrong. So that's one way to participate in this process. I want to give credit to the organization, the medical cannabis community, because you have a group of organizations all together and people that understand this process. And I'm sure you should and have been connected to the legislators that help with this process. So I would say now it's time for you to take your knowledge and direct it to the House sponsor and the Senate sponsor and offer your suggestions and ways to fix this. That's a must. I mean, you are in a position right now, like not many other groups that have desires to change the law. They don't have the foundation of advocacy, and you have that. So you have to use it, and you have the knowledge to fix this. And legislators count on people with the knowledge to fix it and give us help with this process. And so we look forward to working with you. As I said, I will be working with organizations, especially you, Mark, and the Showman Group, and we will be working on a process to amend the law. I will not sit back any longer and just allow for the bill and the law to entrust the administration and trust the House sponsor and trust the Senate sponsor that they're going to do right. You know, it's my responsibility moving forward to stop it now and fix it moving forward. And that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to make that commitment with this group that I want to help. And I will be calling on the administration. As of Tuesday, they will be getting requests. I will be sending letters to the administration requesting Zoom meetings or in-person meetings with the key individuals in administration, including the director of the Illinois Department of Professional Regulators. She has to be on board. It has to be all hands on deck, because at the end of the day, moving forward, there are still lots of licenses that could be won. And this right now is something that I think that we can fix if there's a real political will to do it. And the advantage right now that I see is the legislation did get it right in a way to a certain degree, because we only started with 75 licenses. That's a small number because, Mark, you know how many licenses will ultimately be let in the state of Illinois, but the legislature said, let's start with a small number, 75, and see how the rollout goes. And now we see, now we need to fix it. And so we can make sure that things are better. So I'm hopeful moving forward that we have a governor that wants to get it right. We have an administration that will work hard, and we have a group of citizens that will push, and a group of advocates that understand this, that will make sure that they are part of the fixes.
And clearly, these licenses are an issue, at the very least, for all of the consumers of cannabis products in this state, because part of what this ultimately speaks to is the ability to access the product that you want to access in a safe and convenient environment in a place close to you. And if we don't have more licenses, we're certainly going to have a concentration of licenses in the same place where we have concentrations of banks and grocery stores and restaurants and everything else, and certain areas left out. So I do believe and agree with you that there's a lot there. I do want to say, and I don't want to speak out of turn, the lead sort of sponsors of the cannabis legislation, I think, are widely, respected and admired for what they did. A pioneering law, and what they helped put together, what you helped shape and pass, was talked about as the gold standard. And so I want to give kudos to the sponsors. I don't want to get into it, but I know that they have agonized over, a long time about the fact that, they pass something, they give it birth, and then somebody else takes it and runs with it and doesn't even ask them their opinion about major things that they brought to bear. And so I know those legislators will want to work with you to put more meat on the bones and to, build on the initial accomplishment. And I want to thank you. Will you come back and talk with me again as soon as you have those Zoom meetings or in-person meetings with some of the folks that we've talked about?
Absolutely, I will. And I hope that this is just the beginning of access to my office and access to your office as it relates to the moving forward for cannabis in Illinois. And I do feel confident that we have a House and a Senate sponsor that will listen and help get this right.
Amen to that. Representative, I will let you at this point continue with your holiday weekend. I think those of us who care deeply about this issue are very, very grateful to you for taking the time to be available and for your thoughtful approach to this. You know, it would have been real easy to come on and just sort of throw all sorts of rhetorical bombs at this thing. I thank you for your thoughtful and measured approach. And yeah, I mean, we do look forward to working with you as a lobbyist, as an advocate, as a cannabis consumer. I do look forward to working with you to get this right.
Well, thank you, and thank all of the consumers for the revenue. The state needs it.
Well, that's greatly appreciated. We'll keep working on it. Thank you, and have a great weekend. And we look a lot more for a lot more coming next week.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.